I think people the least happy they've potentially ever been. I think that in general, there's like a general discontent amongst people that, like, I call it like the crisis of contentment. There's like a crisis that we're having where people just are not living life like that actually makes them like happy, or they're happy in the moment because they get like the nice dopamine hit from their technology and their social media, but they don't have like the general like connected life that creates like a feeling of contentment, where like every day like is a good day, you feel good in general. Yeah, something bad happens, it makes you feel upset, but in general life's good, you know.
What's up, guys? I'm Zach, your host of the Auxoro podcast, where we bring you face-to-face with music artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, doctors, designers, and other interesting humans in a show that dives deep into the story beyond the surface. You can now support Auxoro with a donation on Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo. We're a completely independent platform with no outside sponsors or investors, and we're grateful for any amount, no matter how small, to help push the conversation forward. If you'd like to support, you can visit patreon.com/Auxoro, link in the podcast description as well. On Patreon, you get early access to episodes, discounts on merchandise, and other Patreon exclusive content. Thank you for your support. If you love keeping up with Auxoro, we have a newsletter sent out twice a month with all of our latest content, as well as other articles, podcasts, books, and advice that we find helpful. I'm constantly scrounging the internet for things to improve my life, and I would love nothing more than to be able to share the things that have helped me with you. Go to auxoro.com and join over 1,000 others by subscribing to the newsletter. The link is also in the podcast description. This episode is brought to you by The Aux. The Aux is a short-form podcast produced by Auxoro, bringing you a daily dose of uncensored wisdom to jumpstart your life. 10 minutes or less, no bullshit, no topic off limits. We explore topics like fashion, porn, relationships, meditation, and more. You can subscribe to this podcast by searching The Aux, AUX, wherever you listen to podcasts. Today on Auxoro, I sit down with Jack Peach, a researcher, writer, and traveler whose goal is to find harmony amidst the chaos. Jack runs a blog called Think in Peach, which you can find at thinkinpeach.com, and you can find him on Twitter at thinkinpeach. Links to both of these will be in the podcast description. He is from the UK, but currently resides in Thailand. I connected with Jack on Twitter a couple months back, and I'm excited to get the chance to speak with him. We discussed the weaponization of feminism, spending time in solitude, which is harder than ever to do today, what it's like to live in Thailand, and how monogamy is essential for society. Without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Jack Peach. To answer your question about the time zone, it actually worked out perfectly because I drove up from New York. I live in Brooklyn to snowboard in upstate New York tomorrow morning. So I wasn't planning on going to bed till around like 10 or 11 o'clock my time. And the Airbnb we're staying at has pretty decent Wi-Fi. So I figured, why not knock out a podcast?
Yeah, sounds good. It's the good thing about it, right? We don't have to be. You can do it anywhere as long as you've got your laptop and a decent connection.
It's pretty crazy, and I'm grateful for platforms like Zencastr that allow you to do things like this. I know there are a few other ones too that people use to connect with people all over the world, but I wouldn't have even thought that it would be possible to have a decent quality conversation with someone just 4 or 5 years ago when I was still in college. I would, this is kind of, every time I do it, I try to keep the perspective like this is really fucking mind blowing. Like no matter the content of the podcast, the fact that I'm able to connect to people like this is pretty crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Especially for me, like, because I now live in Asia, like there's not that many Westerners that live near me. There's a fair few, but it's definitely there's not a lot of like-minded folks, if you know what I mean. So whenever I'm able to actually communicate with mainly people in America, it tends to be for me the people that I've networked with or whatever.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great for me, to be honest, like to be able to do it. And like you say, I can still live here in Asia and be able to have sort of an online presence where I can still get my ideas out. Like, I actually pretty stoked about that, to be honest.
I was thinking, what are the free speech laws like over there? Because in America, they're the best in the world. I don't have to worry about getting locked up for saying something. But if you speak out against the Thai government, for example, or you say something they don't like, what are their capabilities, or like what do they care about over there in terms of free speech?
Yeah, the free speech laws definitely they don't really exist. So like, I would never talk about the government, for example, or like they have a constitutional monarchy here, so you can't really it's actually illegal to even mention it. So you have to be a little bit careful of that. So I'll never talk about anything like political wise. But I think in general for foreigners, they're a bit more relaxed, whereas for like actual Thai people, they're definitely not as relaxed. There was a case recently near me, a university near me, where somebody was speaking on their Facebook or some, I forget what, some social media about the political system here, and then police turned up, like confiscated all her phones, took all her, hacked into all her accounts, and so you got to be a little bit careful about that for sure here. I was just going to say it's not a democracy here, so people forget that because Thailand's quite a popular tourist destination, but it's not a democracy.
That would be a good place to kind of launch off of, because you originally grew up in the UK, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What are the biggest societal differences that you've noticed kind of like operating on a day-to-day basis since you've moved to Thailand? And how long have you been in Thailand?
So I've been in Thailand for about 2.5 years, I think, about 2.5 years now. But I've lived in Asia in general, like different parts, for over 3 years. So I was actually in Asia for about a year before I moved to Thailand. So the biggest differences for sure is like here that it's very sort of communitarian, It's not individualistic. Everyone kind of follows a trend. As soon as something becomes a trend, it's like everyone is into it, Everyone wears like the same clothes kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have certain days where you have to wear like certain colors based on like, depends, like if it's like the king's birthday, or like there's one day a week where you all have to wear like yellow, which is like the king's color and stuff. So people are much less individualistic, and there are like different kind of subcultures, but within the subculture, everyone kind of dresses the same, if you know what I mean. So for here, like fitting in is like conforming is like the most important thing in Thailand, actually. It's
wow.
Yeah, that can be kind of difficult sometimes, especially when you're working here. Like you can't like give any criticism. Giving criticism is implicitly bad. Like you can't speak back to your boss. You like, your boss says it, you have to just do it, even if it's absolutely fucking stupid. So that's just how it works, unfortunately. But it has advantages as well because it's pretty inefficient.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes things a little bit easy. That's why you get a lot of Westerners working here.
It sounds like it's there's a commonality with America in terms of the trends, but I would say that when people in America start trends, they do it to stand out, not to blend in, because everyone always wants to be the one that's starting the trend. Like when you watch the Kardashians and, they're trying to make something blow up on Instagram or start like a clothing line, something like that. So that's not a mentality at all in Thailand where you want to blow up for doing something or like get famous for doing something.
Not really, unless it's like a lot of people like opening businesses here is pretty easy, and a lot of people have like their own small, like maybe a coffee shop or like little food place, and then they want to become popular because of that. But nobody really wants to be the trendsetter. I'm not sure really where these trends emerge from. But even like music here, a song will blow up and it will be all you hear for 6 months. Like legit, it gets really annoying. because everywhere you go, like, and as soon as it comes on, like everyone will be like singing along to it. And it's quite good in some ways because they have their own music. They still have a very strong cultural identity in Thailand where they're very proud of being Thai. Which, for example, in England, I don't know if it's the same in America, but in England, that's not the case. People are kind of don't like to be British, if you know what I mean. They don't like to embrace their culture. They think it's, in general, obviously not everyone, but it's in general pretty negative. Whereas you don't get
people
that
in England don't like to embrace it.
Yeah, they don't like English people kind of don't like being English, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like being English is so cool from an American perspective.
Yeah, me too.
Especially since everyone who's English in the movie is always like this cool, suave, debonair guy, like this stereotypical James Bond figure, which is like how they're portrayed in at least entertainment media. But I think, at least for me, and you know, in the US at least, when people think of British, it's like, oh, that, you know, if you say it's something in that accent, you could get anyone to do anything if you say it in that accent. Like, it sounds so cool and like suave to be British.
Yeah, in general as well. Like when you travel, people tend to quite like British people based on, I'm not sure why, like maybe the accent, and in general, like it's like seen as a cool culture, like not just it by Americans. Like in Asia, people in general like British people and like British culture. They like British music, stuff like that. But in Britain, people tend to think like Britain's. Am I allowed to swear, by the way? Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, cool. Just check it. Yeah,
say
cool.
Whatever the fuck you want.
People in England tend to think it's a bit of a shithole, like, which, having lived abroad, is like not true at all. But the patriotic element of Britain, it still exists, but we're very kind of, well, I'd say we're further on the sort of woke agenda than America in terms of how long it's been going on for. Like, I think especially people of my generation, right? Especially like university and stuff, people in general have pretty negative outlook on Britain. And we've had quite a right-wing government for quite a few years now, for probably over a decade, I reckon, about a decade maybe. And I think it, like, it's like Trump's been in power for like 10 years and people just like hate Britain because of it, you know, because not for any legitimate reason, more for their own projections of insecurity and pushing it out on the country and the political system. Because when I went back, it was just like, whenever I go back, I'm like, wow, man, things work here, you know? Just the roads make sense. People know how to behave, you know, like you can turn on the tap and it's 100% coming out with water. Like, you're not going to, like, one time I was in my old flat and I leant on my sink, just like when brushing my sink, I'm tired or whatever, just leant on it. I just knocked the whole thing off and smashed the whole sink and had water spilling out everywhere. And it's like, that's never happened to me in England. You know what I mean? Like, people just take it a bit for granted when you've never known anything different.
Yeah, no, it's the land of the strong sinks. That's what we think over
exactly.
Over in America. Every time we think of England, it's always like, those guys have pretty strong sinks over there. I don't know what they do, but
good plumbing, you know.
Working. Yeah, good plumbing, quality.
Got the Victorian sewer system, you know.
They got that quality plaster. But no, that's interesting. Is it like a self-hatred, do you think? Like people are like like almost like lashing themselves for being British? That's kind of what it sounds like.
Kind of, yeah. Because of the empire, there's like there's a whole section of Britain which is like anti our history because of our colonial history. And like the racial elements, obviously, of that, and the fact that we're perceived as the oppressors. It's all kind of built into that modern sort of postmodern woke Marxist, neo-Marxist kind of culture, which is really prevalent. Like at school, I don't think we were ever taught about the colonies really, but if we were, I can't really remember now. It's quite a long time ago now. If we were, it was definitely not portrayed in a positive light. We would talk about like the Romans colonizing us and like the Anglo-Saxons, and we talk about that in history lessons. But when it comes to like what we did in India, or Malaysia, Singapore, wherever, all over the world, like it's kind of built into this sort of like we consider ourselves as the bad guys in history, which I'm not sure is necessarily a good attitude to take. And I think it's also built in with just general kind of feelings of kind of nihilism and self-loathing that are pretty endemic, I think, within Western culture as a whole. I think it's probably the same in America.
Yeah, I was going to say it's
my interactions.
It sounds like white privilege in America on some level.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same ideological and the same basis. It's got the same. It's rooted in the same thing.
Yeah, it seems like they're hitting similar strings. I'm actually I just got done reading this book. It's called The Problem with Everything by her name is Megan Daum, Daum, and it kind of goes into the whole cultural wars. And you mentioned the oppressor and the oppressed, and she talks about in the book. She's older than me and you. I think she's in her 40s, so she's above the millennial generation. And she kind of talks about how people nowadays, especially on college campuses in the United States, are framing things as the oppressor versus the oppressed. And so when you walk through the world, viewing everything through the lens of trying to fit in, okay, is this person the oppressor or is this person the oppressed? Or is this ideology oppressing or being oppressed? And you kind of fit everything you encounter into both of these sides. And college students are taught today to kind of walk through everything with that lens where it's just like you have to assign some value of oppression. I think a lot of people in the United States call it the oppression Olympics, where it's like if you are the most oppressed, you're towards the top, and then the oppressors are towards the bottom in terms of value of your opinions. But she kind of walks through a lot of that sentiment of like seeing things on the strong divide of oppressed and oppressor rather than like seeing the nuance. Like it's not always black and white. Like Britain's history is incredibly nuanced. It's not just like for thousands of years they just oppressed people and that's all they did. Like if that was all they did, if that was all they did, we wouldn't have a lot of the new worlds that we eventually explored and many technologies and great accomplishments. Like with the bad shit comes good shit, but people always want to stick to one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's a very binary way of looking at the world, like fit everything into one of two categories. And the world is a lot more complex than that. And you can kind of see that complexity come in when you have someone like who's more oppressed, right? The white, gay, transgender person, or is it the Muslim, the brown Muslim homophobe who doesn't like them? Like, how do you resolve this issue? They're both oppressed groups, and there's within it. There's already tensions that they struggle to resolve because it's such a simplistic way of looking at the world. And yeah, one of the ironic things, for example, about the British Empire is if you come out, for example, to Asia, I've met people, and I was like, in the past, I was kind of brought up in that way of thinking that, yeah, it was bad. We just like took everything and like we never gave anything back. We just like exploited the populace. And it's actually not true because my attitude to that changed when actually talking with people in these countries and seeing the countries that Britain colonized. You go to, like Malaysia or Singapore, which were British colonies in this area, or Brunei. I don't like Brunei actually, but they all have way better infrastructure than the countries surrounding them. They're all more economically developed. They all have a higher standard of living. And a lot of it is because of the infrastructure and the systems that the British put into play when we were colonizers. I've met people in the Philippines, for example. The Philippines were colonized by the Spanish, later actually America as well. So they have anyway, that's a side point. And I met some Filipino people who were like, yeah, but we wish that we'd been colonized by Britain because we would probably be in a much better system. The Spanish just kind of took everything and like didn't build anything and just and now the country is a bit of a mess, So that kind of changed my opinion about it. And when you see it, like in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, they basically have like a British style, like underground. It's not underground, but it's like a a railway system, a metro system that's going through the city that is, it's like looking at the underground, you know, all the signs are laid out the same, all the trains are done the same. And it's a very effective system, and it's really easy to get around Kuala Lumpur compared to, say, Jakarta in Indonesia or Bangkok in Thailand. So it's not as simplistic as just like, and you can't just ignore the past. That's the other thing. You can't just like look at the lens of the past, like look at the past through the lens of today. Like we have this new kind of oppressed oppressor dynamic to look at the world, which is a new thing really. It's not something it's not how the world was viewed back when these things were going on. So it's the same when people look at art through the lens of it, and they cast that, oh, but this artist was a sexist, therefore all his amazing beautiful paintings are like worthless. It's like you can't look at the past with the lens of today and judge it on today's metrics. You know, you got to judge it within context of the time. It's too simplistic to look at it like that.
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to let you guys know that you can now support Auxoro with a donation on Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo. We're a completely independent platform with no outside sponsors or investors, and we're grateful for any amount, no matter how small, to help push the conversation forward. If you'd like to support, you can visit patreon.com/Auxoro. The link is in the podcast description as well. On Patreon, you get early access to episodes, discounts on merchandise, and other Patreon exclusive content. Also, you can go check out our merch at auxoro.com/store. We have tees and hoodies for sale, so you can listen to the show in style. Now back to the episode. People want to go back and kind of do this like racist, sexist, just like any sort of phobic evaluation of past historical figures that had any significance or they're responsible for inventions or music in the present day, and kind of do this post-mortem 200-300 years later sometimes, where they're saying, oh, okay, like this person, you know, he had slaves, or he disrespected women, or he treated this person like shit. That's never a good thing. But part of me is just like, of course that person did. That was what everyone else was doing during that time. Like just thinking about it today, I don't pretend to be some sort of, or at least I try not to pretend to be some sort of like morally superior figure, where I think if I was transported 200 years back in the day, I would just be transplanting my 2020 morals into 1850. Like that's not how it would work. If I was born in 1850, you're coming into that evaluation with the knowledge that you have today. So it's like, if I was living back then, I can only assume that I would have been acting similarly. I wouldn't be a huge standard of deviation. Like I probably wouldn't have been the one to come out and as like an 18-year-old and been like, slavery is wrong. Like we need to stop this. Like it probably would have just been something that was happening and that I viewed as a part of life, as shitty and dehumanizing as that practice was.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to think that they would be that person, right? They have like this vision of themselves as the hero, like, and the reality is most people aren't. That's why those people are remembered as heroes. They are the exceptional individuals of their age, you know. But we think just because we grow up in a time which we consider more civilized, like therefore we would be the civilized ones in the past. No, humans are more conformist than we care to admit. So. And it links back to Thailand. Like here is the biggest example of that. People here really do, they have to conform because of the legal system. And if they don't, they are really putting their head on the line, you know. And how many people are going to do that? I can tell you for a fact. Here, I don't know any. So you got to remember what's going on as well, like externally, what the power systems at play are. Can't get rid of power.
And there are a bunch of things that we do today that I'm sure people 50 or 100 years from now will look back on us and be like, can you believe those savages, you know,
100%.
Participated in factory farming or like whatever it is. Like just pick something. Like if you were able to basically grow meat in a lab, which a lot of companies are doing today in the US. And although it doesn't taste exactly the same, I think they're going to get pretty close within the next decade to kind of like grow meat essentially as it would be without actually having to kill animals, when that's just a normal thing. Decades from now or 100 years from now, people are going to look back on us and be like, can you believe they used to just slaughter, whatever it is, like 2 billion cows a year or whatever to feed themselves? Whereas today, you don't even think twice about it.
Yeah, so I've got an interesting take on that. Like, I'm not a fan of that lab grown meat because I worry about it on a couple of different levels. So I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Problem with that lab grown meat is I don't think that humans are capable of replicating the complexity of nature through science. Like, we don't have a great enough understanding of the system. It's way too complex. And we, as much as, maybe I don't like factory farming, but I don't have a problem with killing animals to eat them because, if my cat can do it, I don't have a cat, but if a cat can do it, like, why can't I? Like, we humans are evolutionarily designed to eat meat. Like, you can see it from the health effects that occur to people when they do remove meat from the diet and turn vegan, etc. And I don't think like lab-grown meat will have the same nutritional effect. Maybe in 100 years, who knows? But the other problem I have with that is it is actually going to just further consolidate kind of food conglomerate power, who are the people who actually tend to perform the malpractice in farming anyway. It tends not to be your local small-scale smallholder who's got like 50 cows. He tends to look after his animals pretty well. It's when you have these huge-scale organizations that have like chickens are the worst example, like battery farming chicken. That's not done by your neighbor. That's done by what will be the same corporation who will grow the lab-grown meat. So for me, I wonder how much of this is actually an ethical thing and more of a profitability thing. If you can grow meat in a lab and you can standardize it and you know exactly what kind of metrics you can hit, which you can't with animals in the same way, there's more variability to it, then that's going to be positive for them. And I don't trust these elitely powerful multinational corporations. They're more powerful than a lot of nation states even. And I just don't trust anyone with that level of power, especially considering their track record. But like for me, I think like the way we solve factory farming is we deglobalize and decentralize food production and go back to what traditionally humans did, which was have a local food structure, which is a local market where the market therefore gets food from the local producers. They're therefore more accountable to the people around them. You can go visit their farm. You can see how they're treating their animals if you want. And then you'll be able to know that there's like a better ethical way to do it. I'm just a little bit worried about like why this push for lab-grown meat when there is other solutions. That for me, I'm calling me cynical, but
yeah,
I am a bit of a cynical.
I think it's more common sense than cynical because there has to be profit in it for these multinational companies, or else they wouldn't be pursuing research and development. It's kind of like the same companies that sell cigarettes are the ones that sell the nicotine patches. They're on both sides. They're both sides of the game. So like they're going to addict you to cigarettes and then they'll sell you the nicotine patches to quit. Like they'll do the same thing with factory farming.
They're probably invested as well in like the healthcare system as well in some way, so all these ties are linked. But
exactly. Yeah. The more people that smoke, the sicker people are going to get. And then the more money's going to be spent on healthcare. So they profit either way.
There's quite a big drive at the moment, I think, for sort of moving humans away from like what I would consider a natural diet, which is an omnivorous meat-based. I think like is the evidence of human eating meat-based is pretty strong. Doesn't mean we're like carnivores. There's some people pushing carnivore in the other direction. I'm not. I tried that and didn't work so great for me, so I'm not sure that's the best option. But
what was that like? I follow some people who advocate for the carnivorous diet, but I've never actually tried. I eat meat. I participate in the factory farming, knowing the moral disasters of it. The more I read about it, I'm like, this this is terrible, but I can't not eat meat because it's so fucking good, basically.
Yeah, and it's essential, I think.
Yeah. What was the carnivore diet like?
I ate what we call carnivore adjacent. I wasn't literally just eating meat, but I was eating basically meat and like no carbs, and very small amount. Like I'd eat some garlic and stuff, I'd put some vegetables in it, and I still drank coffee. So I wasn't like completely carnivorous, but yeah, we did it for about 2 or 3 months, me and my fiance. And for me, it wasn't too bad. Like I felt good, but my stomach wasn't perfect. And my partner had very bad stomach problems.
Mhm.
Actually, she like had a lot of like pain in her stomach, and so we basically realized like, yeah, it's not working for us. Maybe it works for other people. It worked better for me than her, and we're different. Like we're different ethnicities, so it might be something to do with. I've seen some theories that people that are white, sort of Northern Europeans, get on better with it, because if you look at like the places where we live, there's like in winter, for example, if you live in Scandinavia, there's no vegetables to eat. You're literally only going to be eating meat. You're going to be living off what you can hunt.
Yeah.
So I've seen some arguments about that. Whereas my partner's Asian, and here there's an abundance of fruit and vegetables all year round. So there might be some kind of genetic component. Yeah.
So we just evolved differently.
So just for example, I can't eat chili. If I eat chili, I get stomach ache. I just do. Like I've tried it. I've lived in Asia for 3 years. Like I like spicy food, but if I eat chili, I get stomach ache. It's just true. It's been 3 years. It's not my body like adapting to it. It's not because I've been here a month or something. But whereas, my fiance can eat chili all day and it's no problem.
And she's fine.
So there's these small different. Yeah, she's fine.
Wow.
So there's these small differences that do exist.
I love spicy food, but I have the same problem. I always pay for it in the bathroom at some point or other.
Yeah, it makes me too uncomfortable, so I just give up on it now.
So something that I wanted to get into was as I was stalking your Twitter, I guess would be the best word for it. I came across a tweet on solitude, and I'll just read it before we get into it. Your tweet was, quote, "The hardest inner work is achieved in solitude. Those who are constantly surrounded by lackeys damage their potential. Never alone, they never find time to reflect." And having alone time, just to preface the reason why I wanted to bring this tweet into play, I've been working on having more alone time in my life, whether it's my meditation practice where I, sit my ass down on a pillow for 20 minutes every morning, or not listening to music or podcasts when I'm walking down the street on the sidewalk, just like kind of, sitting with my own thoughts. As much as that sucks sometimes, there's never a point where I do it and I regret it. So I'm always like, all right, if my brain's going in overdrive right now, maybe it's a good time for me to just kind of walk without music today and try to, be present going to work or something like that. So I was wondering for you, how do you work alone time into your life? Hey guys, this is a reminder that you can now follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Auxoro. If you're on Instagram, it's at Auxoro. Twitter and Facebook is at Auxoro Mag. You can search Auxoro on all three and we will pop up. We post behind the scenes content and clips that you will not get anywhere else if you don't follow us on social media. And it also helps get the word out when you tag us, tag the episodes, and let other people know that you're listening to Auxoro. Now, back to the episode.
So, there's a few different ways. Like I was raised, I'm an only child, so I don't have brothers or sisters. So as a kid, I spent a lot of time on my own anyway. So I kind of became pretty comfortable with being alone because of that. Like my parents would always say, like, because I get bored. They always be like, no, go and entertain yourself. Like we can't play with you like 6 hours a day or whatever. So I got kind of used to that as a kid growing up. And we'd go on holiday, and I'd kind of be forced to go make friends with other kids because otherwise I'd just be with my parents, and that's not ideal as a kid, just sitting with your parents all day. So for me,
you're not the cool kid.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always been more comfortable, like more maybe comfortable with being on my own than other people that are around me. But in today's age, like you say, like it's so easy to, if you're just walking somewhere, just, I'm going to put a podcast on and like feel like I'm making use of that time, right? Or for example, I used to be pretty lazy in the past. I had a very like lazy attitude. And when I tried to reprogram myself to start like doing housework better, taking care of the house better, being more productive at home, and not just like ignoring things that need cleaning or whatever, like I used to when I was sort of in my late teens, early 20s. One of the ways I reprogrammed that is I'd put a podcast on and do the dishes, for example, because it was a way of motivating me to do it. It's like, it's an excuse to listen to something I want to listen to, rather than, I've got to do some work I don't want to do. But I've also got to that point where I realize, like, now every time I do the dishes, I'm putting on a podcast. Every time, like, I've got some downtime, I'm picking up my phone and playing with Twitter. Like, and I realized probably about 6 months ago, like, it had gone too far the other way, if you know what I mean. So like you say, if you were walking to work, you put a podcast on, but it's not good for us. We humans in the past wouldn't have had that kind of stimulation. Like if we had to say, like going back to our ancestral roots, we had to chop some firewood to make a fire to cook in the evening. We weren't putting on a podcast or like listening to, like, I don't know, Mariah Carey or something, like, well, and like having a dance over Christmas, like building our fire. No, we'd have put that fire and we'd have been thinking about whatever's going on in our life, maybe creating some creative solution. And I think if you are a creative as well, you need this time. You need this time where, I like to say, like, something that occupies your hands but leaves your mind free. So whatever that is, like, you're doing something. You're not just sitting down. Like, I personally find if I'm just sitting down, I can't think in the same way. But if I'm like, washing the dishes, maybe like sweeping the floor or whatever, I'm doing something, but I don't have to think about it. And that's when you start thinking about yourself. You maybe reflect on like what you've done wrong, what's been bad, like what you're not good at, or thinking about some ideas, trying to work out an idea, something you were thinking about or you read about on, a good article or blog or something about an issue. You're trying to work it out. And it's especially useful when I'm like engaged in writing, like having that time. If you don't have that time to think, you can never really organize your thoughts, and you end up kind of getting into a bit of a manic loop, I think, actually.
I feel the same way since I've started walking to work in silence, I guess, or just, not listening to music or podcasts or whatever it is, when I'm just hearing the cars pass on the highway or people walking by me, I come to so many more realizations much more quickly, to the point where I have basically a note file in my phone for things that I just think of on my walk to work, where I just wasn't able to be in that space when I was listening to music or podcasting or doing whatever it is all the time, where it's just like I'm kind of in autopilot and not really thinking about shit when I'm walking. And what made me realize that it was a problem is there was a woman that walked up to me on the street, probably like 6 to 8 weeks ago. And she asked me if there was a Home Depot about a mile back from where I came from. And I realized that I didn't know. And I walked by there every single day. And I was like, like I pass by the same 8 to 10 stores every single time I go through that section, at least, 300 times in the past year. How the fuck do I not know if there's a Home Depot there? Like I couldn't picture it. I was like, wow, like I'm really out of it when I walk to work. Like I'm almost a zombie in the morning, just like not even, and which is kind of dangerous because, what if someone just like wanted to do something like mug me or something, or like I'm just not aware of my surroundings at all. And it kind of made me realize that when that woman asked me, I was like, I can't tell you. Like I have no idea. She's like, "Oh, are you not from around here?" I'm like, "No, I am. I just have no idea." Sorry. But yeah, it kind of scared me, and I felt good about myself because I was meditating in the mornings. And I don't know if you listen to Sam Harris, but I use his app that he came out with, and it's called Waking Up for anyone who's listening. He basically sends you different meditations every day. But it kind of scared me into, every so often, once or twice a week, I'll just walk to work. It's about 25, 30 minutes. And then I'll walk back. I'll just pick a day where I'm just like, I'm not going to listen to anything today. I just need to walk, and whatever comes to me, but I'm not going to try to drown it out.
Just out of interest, is your walk like, it's on a main road, is it? And like quite grey or?
Basically, yeah, just sidewalks, stores, gas stations.
Yeah, so I got a theory.
I'm basically walking along a freeway.
Yeah, I got a theory about this. Like, I think part of our like disconnect from those kind of situations is because there's too much stimulus in those areas. There's too many cars. It's like we don't feel comfortable in like a grey environment. Whereas if you're walking through like nature in like green or in a park, I think you're less likely to want to kind of drown it out, if you know what I mean, with like a podcast or I actually like, I do think that makes a difference as well. That's just a little pet theory I'm kind of working on at the moment. I've been thinking about. So I just think that when you're in those kind of environments, it's not like a pleasant experience, walking through it. You're like, you're not enjoying it. You're not seeing like beautiful flowers or a tree that's got a nice set of, like a nice form to it, or there's like some wildlife around that you want to be aware of. It's kind of like, as if I don't stand on the road, I don't get hit by a car, and then it's just grey. It's like, I don't really want to engage with that. It's not, it doesn't speak to our soul,
It's like your spidey senses almost just shut off when there's too much stimulus, especially in a city environment like Brooklyn or New York City. It's kind of, you're just getting pelted with shit all the time. And when you evolved over the past 2.5 million years growing up in tribes of 150 people or less, and all of a sudden you're in a clusterfuck of a city with 8 million people, it probably, makes your senses go haywire in a lot of ways, where I'm sure like your hypothesis where if you're in nature, you're less inclined to want to shut off those senses where you're paying attention. I'm sure that has something to do with it, where you're just so overstimulated where your body just kind of shuts down and you're just moving through space, but you're not really aware what you're moving through.
Yeah, for sure. I think like, especially as AR, like augmented reality, becomes more popular and like spread out, that's just going to get worse as well. I'm not too keen on that. Like, I'm a bit of a traditionalist in my character, in my perspective. So I think these things are going to get worse as well. But I just don't think we need as much stimulation as we have, honestly. Like, and I'm just as bad with it. Like our phones are the worst, and I'm as bad as anyone with my phone. Like, especially trying to get content out on Twitter, trying to like jot down ideas or just see what's going on in case there's like something, because I'm sure like Twitter is a very addictive format as well. It's like if you're not on it, you miss it, and you like don't want to miss this, there might be something really important. Of course, 95% of the time it's not. So that's something I've been trying to work on. Something I've been doing lately, like I already have some rules, like I don't use my phone in the bedroom. Like that's something like we have a rule. Like we're not allowed to take our phones into the bedroom because it becomes too distracting, and like it's just not a conducive environment for sleeping, for example, or talking. If we want to talk about what our day or whatever. But I've been trying to set periods aside where I'll just turn the internet off on my phone. So if someone needs to contact me in an emergency, they can call me, but I'm not getting distracted by like, I'm just going to flick through my Twitter for 5 minutes or check my Facebook or see who's messaged me that something that isn't important and doesn't need replying to urgently, So just a couple of hours a day where you can kind of separate from it. I think it's very important to try and create these spaces. And the problem is with like today, we actually have to actively work to create them. Like this is one of the problems. Like we're influenced by our environment. Going back to what we were saying about colonialism, like if you're born in that area, of course you're probably going to behave in that. Like what's the norm for that era? And our environment today is phones are too easy to distract us. So we have to actively work to create the space that disconnects us from that Whereas in the past, that was their natural state of being. Like, use the example I said again of chopping firewood. You're chopping firewood, yeah, that's your time to think. You didn't have to create that space. You needed the firewood, otherwise you're going to like freeze to death or be able to cook. So you need that. So that's your time to think. It's just part of your existence. Whereas today, people have to actively work to create that. I think it's a factor. Obviously, there's never like one single factor for like most societal issues, but I think that is a factor in like the mental health problems we have today, and a lot of people kind of not connected with who they are as people. I think a lot of people are disconnected from what it means to be human, and I think that's part of it.
Kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where, with things like Zencaster, you can connect to anyone on the planet, and there's so many more opportunities for connection, but at the same time, we're the most disconnected that we've ever been in terms of face-to-face interaction. And I am guilty of this like anyone else. I'll go out and I'll sit at a restaurant or a bar, and I'll see some guy on his phone or girl on her phone, and I'll just be like, that I do not want that to be me ever. Like, I don't want someone to be talking to me and then my face be buried in a phone, even though I'm guilty of that. Like, there are times where I catch myself and I'm like, you're such a fucking asshole for like your cousin talking to you, like your 7-year-old cousin's talking to you, and you're like busy firing off a tweet or an email or whatever. Like, that can wait, but it's like you just have this device in your pocket that's such a godsend, but it makes you a slave to it at the same time. Because back in the day, when there was just snail mail and you had to write letters to people, you had to put so much effort into every single piece of communication, and it was expected that you had to wait a few weeks or months for replies. And now we've had a cut down on the effort that it takes to send a message, but the expectation of replies has exponentially increased to the point where it's like, even emails now, if you don't respond to someone on email within like a couple hours, they'll send you a follow-up. And that used to be text. Like, text used to be, if you don't respond to me in a few hours. Now even emails, people will send you a follow-up, be like, hey, just checking in. And emails used to be like, okay, I thought I had 2 or 3 days to get back to you. Now it's like, I need to get back to you the same day and everything. And it's kind of like this blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of things. Like, everything has a duality of it. Like, has its good sides and bad sides. I'm kind of I've not started writing it yet, but I'm going to write an article about this at some point soon, like about technology. I'm a bit worried about some of the trends that we have in technology at the moment. I think they are, as you said, like, we're more connected than ever, like with each other, but I think we're more disconnected from ourselves than ever. And I do worry about that. I do think, like, in general, people are, I don't know if you experience the same thing, but my time in England, like before I left, like, I think people, the least happy that they've potentially ever been. I think that in general, there's like a general discontent amongst people that, like, I call it like the crisis of contentment. There's like a crisis that we're having where people just are not living life like that actually makes them like happy, like, or they're happy in the moment because they get like the nice dopamine hit from their technology and their social media, but they don't have like the general like connected life that creates like a feeling of contentment, where like every day like is a good day. You feel good in general. Yeah, something bad happens, it makes you feel upset, but in general, life's good. I don't think people feel like that today. I don't know if you find that as well, or.
Yeah. I would say that earlier in my college career, especially before I came across meditation, I was chasing the feeling of happiness rather than just being at peace or contentment, like you put it, because I didn't really have a purpose. I was playing, I played baseball, just as some background information, all the way from 5 years old up until I graduated college. And since high school, I knew that I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And then a couple elbow surgeries later, that wasn't going to be an option because I just wasn't good at baseball. I was like, shit. I was like I went from a player that had a shot at playing professional to like a serviceable college pitcher, which is fine. I loved my baseball career, but in the midst of that time, I didn't have a purpose because I was kind of floating around like, okay, if I'm not a baseball player, I guess I have to get a 9 to 5 corporate job and just enter that world. And that was before I realized that, you can kind of create your own avenue, even if you are working the 9 to 5. Like you can always just create no matter what you're doing. So I was in that in between period where I didn't have baseball. I thought, my life was just going to be miserable. And I was just like chasing that feeling, whether it was with girls or drinking or drugs in college. And I just like was addicted to that high of like being happy and being fulfilled, like in the short term, but I didn't have any purpose behind it, if that makes sense. Like now I feel like I have more of a purpose of just, I love creating content in general, whether it's writing or recording podcasts or helping other people produce their own podcasts, just like something that gives me a meaning beyond how I feel. Like I can wake up feeling like shit one day and know that I still have a purpose. When I was in college, towards the end of my baseball career, I didn't know what my purpose was. So if I was feeling like shit, I was like, well, I guess this is it. Like I'm going to feel like shit forever. Like I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I think it's very, very common. Like I think, the creative process is very important. I think like humans are naturally creative. I've wrote about this as well. Like, I think people, like, we need to create something. Like, if you want to, for example, use like a religious metaphor, which you can either take as real, or you can just see it as a metaphor. Like in the Christian doctrine, like humans are made in the image of God, right? We're made in the image of God, and God is the creator. So what are we? We are that image. We need to create. We need to make something. Like I think it's a very powerful metaphor. Like. And people that don't tend to, like say, not have so much purpose. They're not able to feel like they're really contributing meaningfully at all. That's a big part of it. I think another part, like in general, people have an element of self-loathing. Like again, tied back to the oppressive thing. All these things are interlinked, by the way. Like I don't see any of these things in isolation. Humans are so like complex. It's the hard part is tying all the pieces together, like for me. But the people, I think, have just become so like lost from who we really are. And part of that is, people don't create anymore. They just consume, and that disconnects you from yourself. They're not connected to nature anymore, just by gray blocks, and that disconnects you from yourself. They're not thinking. These are all things we've talked about. That disconnects you from like your humanity. And also like trends, like such as what I wrote the article on about feminism, things like feminism, things like that disconnect us from who we are. They like antinatalism. I don't know if you know about that. There's like a trend in philosophical circles and within.
No, what is that?
So basically, like antinatalism is kind of the thing that like we shouldn't have children because it's the philosophical reasons for it are that like that life is suffering. Everyone suffers going through life. So the best way to reduce suffering is to not have children so that your children don't suffer.
I've heard some people concerned about climate say this. They say that they're not sure about the world where we're going to be in 100 years, so they don't consider it responsible to have children, which I strongly
me too.
disagree with. But I didn't know how to name.
Yeah, so like that's what I was describing before is like the philosophical roots of it, right? But like what you're saying is how it's manifested in modern life. Is it's coming out through climate change. This is how certain things that like I don't know if climate change is true or not. I don't think there's any way we can objectively know actually because the climate is so complex. It might well be true, but it might well not be. That's basically my position on it. But then people use that to say that I shouldn't have children because how can I raise kids in this world? Or maybe like the modern, like you get it on people on the right as well. Like modern life is so feminism and like life sucks. So why should I have children? I don't want to raise children in this environment. It's the same thing. But for me, like reproduction of life is like fundamental to who we are as humans. Like life sustains and reproduces itself, whether it's bacteria, whether it's a frog, whether it's your cat, as long as you've not neutered it, like, or whether it's us. It's like everything wants to reproduce itself. So when you think that like a baby is somehow a bad thing, or like babies aren't like wonderful, they're a net negative on the world, you've got like a real messed up way of viewing life, in my opinion. And I think all of that, for me, that's like the end result of all these disconnections that have been happening with ourselves. We can't, like, humans have lost what they are. They've lost what it means to be human. Because of that, they don't want to reproduce. And I would argue that this is maybe incepted. Like, I'm not sure if this has been a natural progression or rather something we've been gradually steered into over maybe 100 years or so.
Yeah. Can we dig into the feminism weaponized article that you wrote with the sexual grooming? Because I love the article, and there was one quote that stuck out in particular for me. You wrote that psychological and physical scarring takes place when a woman is sexually exploited by men with whom they have no connection. And I was actually listening to a stand-up comedian. Her name is Nikki Glaser. I don't know if you've ever...
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah, so she was...
Yeah, I know.
She was actually talking about something the other day. I think it was during her stand-up special I was watching on Netflix, but she was saying how she stopped having sex with guys because she was getting feelings and wanting to have guys' kids who she had no connection with. Like, the act of having sex with a man was bringing up all these feelings and hormones, and saying like, I want to carry your babies, even though she knew the guy was a piece of shit. So it kind of like, it reminded me immediately of that quote where like men and women experience sex differently, like, and that you can want to have all these primal feelings that come up when you're having sex with someone, even though that's not your intention. Like, you're basically trying to have casual sex and like do a one-off thing, but like all these other feelings come into play when there's zero connection.
Yeah. So a lot of it, like, as I said in the article, a lot of it I basically pinned down on the invention of the pill, which, or like contraception in general, which separated sex from procreation. That's what casualized sex. Before that, you couldn't have casual sex. You know, it was way too risky, especially with the social stigma attached to having an unwanted pregnancy. Since the invention of the pill, it's allowed us to kind of get around our biology. But the problem is that it's kind of like, what's a good metaphor? It's like a shortcut, but the shortcut like doesn't take into account like the terrain you're in. So it's like you want to get to say you're going from one city to another, and there's mountains in the way. So you have to go around the mountains because you can't move the mountains, right? But the shortcut just says, oh no, you just walk through them. You can't do that. Like, basically that's how I see sort of casual sex. It's a result of a technological change, but it doesn't take into account like the actual experience, all the biological drivers and imperatives behind sex that have been developed over millennia. And we're just saying, oh, they don't matter now because we have like this one technological pill that means, yeah, you don't get pregnant, but the psychology of sex hasn't changed. And traditionally, yeah, sex is an emotional, a spiritual, and a physical as well. It's not just physical. It's all three of these things connected into one when two people would have sex. And there's evolutionary biological arguments given for this, and there's been, there's plenty of evidence showing what I said is correct. I'm actually turning that article into a proper, like, fully referenced book that I'm writing at the moment, because I was kind of taken aback by how well it was received, actually, because it's a very controversial topic I was talking about. And I only had 2 comments which were negative out of over 15,000 people read that article. and only 2 people commented like negatively, which is like, wow. I was kind of surprised at that. I was expecting much worse of a backlash. But
what did they have to say that was negative about it?
one of them, that it wasn't referenced, and therefore like I was just making it up and pulling it out of my ass, which yes, it wasn't referenced, but I didn't just make it up. Like, these are things I have read. I just didn't reference them. And another one that was just like, this is coming from a misogynist position, which you can't really, like, if you believe that, yeah, I can't really argue against that, because that's an ideological position you have. But that was it. Like, that was just basically 2 people, which I was really quite shocked about. I was half expecting it, especially when it went viral, I was expecting like a mob to be after me, but luckily avoided that. So maybe because it was a blog article, it was pretty long. Most people couldn't be bothered to read it. But
Yeah. Seems like the pill is like, regardless of your moral stance on it, like it does a lot of crazy shit to a woman's body. Like I don't know the full scientific ramifications of it, but I think as a guy, I take a lot of that stuff for granted, that girls just put the stuff into their body every single day so that they don't get pregnant. And I like feel bad for the woman sometimes, because it's like, it does a lot of things to your body that I don't even think they're aware of a lot of times, especially if you're going as far as taking Plan B, where it basically, disrupts your entire cycle. Like, it makes you feel like shit for, sometimes weeks or up to a month. Like, there's a lot of just accepted thing. I think the pill has done a lot of, it's had positive effects as well as the negative drawbacks that have come with it. But there's a lot of things that we take for granted just because at least me, like, I've only ever known other sexual partners that have lived in a time where the pill is in existence. Like, I haven't known what it's like to have casual sex and like legitimately not have I don't know if like if I'm putting that the right way, but like I didn't have to live in a time where, like you were saying, you had to worry about pregnancy scares all the time. Like, there was no such thing as casual sex. Like, I just take it for granted today that like every woman in the United States is on the pill, and like that's the only way things have ever been. Like, you don't even think about the past before that.
Yeah, same. Like, when I lived in Britain, it was exactly the same. It wasn't till I kind of left and experienced a different environment, and like my partner's from quite a conservative country. She's not Thai. She's from a very conservative country, and kind of in that country, you can't get contraception. You can't get it unless you're married. So like, and they still have a very strong traditional conservative culture around sex and marriage, and it's still very strong there. And it kind of made me realize, like experiencing this, knowing it, like becoming aware of it, like actually this kind of stuff all makes sense. Like, the reasons for it, like, it kind of, to us, because we've been told it's like barbaric and terrible, and like the risks of this, and it's like, oh, you have to get married so young. It's like, oh, it's an awful thing. But people in that country are way happier than people in England, like way happier, like undeniably so. They're all in relationships. They like, yeah, maybe they still have sex before marriage, but they're like, they don't have sex outside of committed relationships. They all get married young, and they're all having kids, and they're all like way more content, to go back to my point earlier. And it kind of made me think, like, this was like the moment where my attitude changed towards it, was like living in that country a few years ago and seeing this. And like, I was like, wow, this is weird. Like, this is like, so like everything I've been told, everything I've brought up with is like, this is like what we're fighting against, is this culture, this system. And yeah, I'm here. Everyone's pretty happy. And it kind of makes sense. And it was a cognitive, it was like a eye-opening moment for me. It was like my cognitive dissonance from what I've been taught and what I've been seeing didn't align, and I had to kind of work through that. And that was, maybe 3 years ago now. It's took me 3 years to kind of get to this point now. Going back to your point about how contraception affects like the female body. For me, that's actually one of the strongest arguments against against hookup culture. It actually affects women way worse than men. Like, this is why the premise of my article is that this isn't like feminism isn't a liberation of women. It's actually a liberation of predatory men and predatory sexual behavior of men, because men are the people that benefit from this feminist, from the feminist system and from the feminist attitude that like casual sex is good and that like women should be able to have sex with as many men as they want and not get pregnant. But what that actually does, it means it's men that get to have sex with many women with no consequence of having to pay for their children.
Yeah.
So, and women suffer the negative effects. They suffer the mental effects, the hormonal imbalances, etc.
The counter argument would be what you were saying, the sexual liberation, where women, you know, when you're on the pill, you don't have to worry about getting pregnant. And for the guy too, you don't have to have that worry either. You can have casual sex without it. You were saying in your article about female empowerment, how it's kind of opposite. Like if a guy were to draw up feminism, he would draw up exactly a lot of the things that are common with it today. Like women should fuck whoever they want and get fucked up and do whatever, like have the sexual liberation because it's better for guys. It's like a guy kind of drew the playbook for feminism and was like,
for sure.
Yeah, like let's get women to, you know, fuck whoever, do whoever. And it's like it's this sexual liberation, but at the same time it's almost like disempowering for women.
Definitely, because for me, like what I was saying about like the mountains, which I'm using as a metaphor for our biology, like women's biology hasn't changed in the past 60 years since the pill got invented. And I go through the arguments why, like, there's the evolutionary arguments why women are not meant to be sexually promiscuous. It's dangerous for them. It's dangerous for their children. Like, a man in the past would not have wanted to raise another man's child because it's a drain on his resources and it's not continuing his genetic line. So why is he going to invest his genetics into another woman's child, another man's child? Sorry. So, and for women, they have to they traditionally do most of the child rearing. They look after the child when it's a baby. They're the person that carries the child for 9 months, leaving them essentially very, very, very vulnerable. So if they have not got a man to protect them while they're gestating a child, like, or the man that they're with, it's not his child and he knows that, like, that's dangerous for her. It's a risky situation. So over many years, there's been selection pressures that select for women to be faithful. Men, I actually think men, it's the same. That they still have these same pressures, but I don't think it's as strong. And the evidence supports that. Because if you go back to our biology, one man can get 20 women pregnant, you know, in 20 nights or less. You know, like one man can get 20 women pregnant, but one woman can only get pregnant by one man. You know, so there is a biological sort of determinant that men don't suffer quite the same consequences from being promiscuous. There's a biological reason for that. Now, to say that,
no, not at all.
Yeah, to say that, like, that's the problem that feminists have, is that there's this biological rooted reason that they don't want to accept as being true, and that's why the biology of men and women, like. It's also why I think transgenderism is being pushed so much as well. There's a pushback against kind of the feminist diatribe. So it's another attempt to blur the boundaries between men and women. So I think all these things are linked. And the biggest losers, like for me, is women. Like that. Like I'm anti-feminist because I'm pro-woman. It sounds very incongruent. It's very hard for people to understand. Because we've been raised in a society, you could say indoctrinated, like where there is any deviation from this view is perceived as sexist. You're sexist for thinking that or for saying that. But I would argue, actually, potentially, yes, I am sexist because I think men and women are different. I don't think anyone can deny that. I think if you will deny that, you're deluded. To be honest, you don't understand reality.
Mm-hmm.
But this comes from a good place. I want to help women, and I think at the moment they are not happy. And again, there's lots of evidence to back this up. In my book that I'm writing at the moment, I'm going to have this all properly sourced and referenced so people can check the studies and can follow up through it to prove that I'm not just pulling this out my arse. Even though, yeah, it is also from my anecdotal experience as well.
I would feel disingenuous if I didn't mention, as a 26-year-old guy living in New York City, I am grateful that the pill exists, or else I would have children, I'm sure, at this point, if I was living in a time before the pill was not around. But at the same, it's kind of like factory farming to me. Like, I know that it has harmful effects for women, but I still participate in it because it's
beneficial, right? It's good.
Yeah, I'm definitely less sexually promiscuous than I've been in the past, especially in college. But I'm not in I'm not in a monogamous relationship at the moment. So I am grateful for the pill, and at the same time, I'm also not a feminist, and I love women, which, like you said, seems like two opposing viewpoints, but it's not. I think a lot of the fourth wave feminism today that's pushed is very just anti-men and female empowerment in a way that it's actually destructive to women. It's like destruction disguised as female empowerment and erasing of biology. Like, women want to be the same as men. And I understand that because for thousands of years, women being different than men meant that women were second-class citizens. But now we know that women are biologically different than men. There are differences between men and women, of course. That's like an obvious thing. But to say that today will get you labeled, like you were saying, as sexist, like you hate women, like you're anti-women, whatever. No, it's not that. I think that the differences between men and women should be celebrated, not kind of mashed
100%.
together and say like, no, we're the same. Like we're different, but those differences, I think, are beautiful and what makes the world run smoothly. Like the differences between men and women is not something to ignore and kind of just like shuffle together as like, no, like we're all the same, like we're just one. No, they're like very obvious push and pulls to the masculine and the feminine that keep the world running smoothly, that when those things kind of get blurred together, when the lines blurred, a lot of, bad shit happens.
For sure. And just to go like to that point as well, like the differences don't necessarily mean inferior and superior. Like this is one of the things that I think feminism again has been, or like current modern trends has pushed to make it perceived that way. I don't see raising children as an inferior thing. I think it's possibly the most important thing we do, is to raise children and raise the next generation and be able to educate them in a way that makes them good people. That is not an inferiority. That's not a negative thing. That's not a bad thing. That's like, if anyone can do that, that is a hell of an achievement. Where it comes from is like this perception that is inferior to, like resource building, for example, or empire management, if you go back to traditional sort of masculine roles. But most men wouldn't have got to that level anyway. That's only like the very, very elite of men. Like most men would just be out like farming. Like, yeah, it's very important. Without farming, we can't have food. But to value that above child rearing is, no, they're probably equal. Without both, society is like going to struggle, is going to suffer, is going to be negative. So it's not just because we're different doesn't mean it's inferior. That's one of the lies that has been pushed, in my opinion, or that's one of the core ideological drivers of the issue. That it's like basically the way I describe it, there's certain key beliefs that maybe not necessarily true, but that drive narrative. And that's one of them for feminism. It's the idea that what women do is inferior to what men do. I disagree with that, basically.
Yeah, exactly. The differences don't necessarily mean
Yeah.
better or worse. I think, I think, you know, maybe some of that is because being a mother is not financially
Yeah.
awarded. Like there's no dollar sign on what you should be paid to be a mother. And I think if we did live in a society where if you were raising children and you got paid to do that, then people, there might be more of a respect to it, because that's kind of, at least in Western society, that's kind of how we value things. The first thing we ask someone when we meet them is, what do you do? Because really we're asking like, how
Yeah,
much
for
do you
sure.
make? That's like what we want to know. So there's no dollar sign on motherhood.
So there's two ways you can go with that. You can either, if you want to keep it within that kind of culture, like you can show how much money you could save, for example, if you're a single mother. Sorry, not single mother. If you're a mother in a relationship, but you homeschool, how much money that's going to save you in education costs, childcare, food costs, because you're able to cook, so you have time to, etc. But of course, the other way, which I think is better, is that you don't value people based on their economic output. I think in general that's a problem with Western society, is that like while economics are important and resources are important, and I'm not going to deny that, like the whole the whole of history shows that it's not the only thing that's important, and I do think the West has gone too far. I think more so in America than Britain, even that's more valued than in America, from what I can tell. But yeah, I would argue for a change to that. Like in terms of like one of the things I kind of push back on is that idea, and instead we should measure people in their character, their achievements outside of just economics, like what someone can do, how they can behave, what they do as a father or mother, how like what their kids look like, are their kids like successful. That's a better measure of success than how rich you are or what job you have. And often when you have these very well paid jobs, you're sacrificing things that for me I would not sacrifice. Like I think that's like money is good and the things they buy us are nice, but they're not. It's again tying back into that, what makes you happy and what makes you content. The things you can buy make you happy in the moment, like it's maybe a bit of pride, or you feel nice, you're in, like you can go on a great holiday, for example. But that's not going to make you like very content. Whereas having like a very successful child or a loving family is going to provide you with a lot more contentment. You're going to feel better. So there's a couple of different ways you can go with that, but I think we have to realign our economic, realign our values, what we value in society. And part of that is, again, to go back, like you were saying, you benefited from being sexually promiscuous. Me too in the past. And that's because that's what our society kind of values. Like you said, you're happy you've not got kids, right? Like that's quite common. That's a common thing.
Very happy at the moment.
Exactly.
Although I want kids in the future,
Exactly.
I'm happy that I'm not 20. I wasn't 21, 2 years old, figuring out how to raise a kid right out of school.
Exactly. But in the past, that would have been more normal. That would have been like fine. Like maybe a little bit older for men. Maybe the woman would have been 20, 21, the man would be 24, 25. But like that would have been like, okay, this is the sign of you being a man now. You've got to take responsibility for something. And that would have been more valued than maybe something that's perceived as more like cool today, or which like I think we value more is like, like how, like whether someone is like, oh, that's like a cool thing you're doing. Like I live in Asia, people all like respect that about me. It's like, oh man, it's so cool that like my friends back home, you live in Asia, like it's cool. Whereas for me, that's the least cool thing about my life. Like I'm much more happy that I'm in a very good like relationship with my fiance, like, and that we have a very stable life, and like we're fit and healthy. We're able to, like, I've learned another language and I can speak another language. For me, that's more cool than the fact that I just live in Asia. I don't know, but it's just how we value things, I think.
I think I'm going through a similar transition where the things that I consider cool are becoming different. Where being cool to me in the past has been, like in college we would say, what's your body count? Basically, guys asking how many girls have you had sex with, or
even that language though, body count, right? You can tell it's bad, right? It's like body count.
Yeah, body count. Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm much more worried about fulfilling a purpose, becoming financially stable. Even though I'm not in a monogamous relationship, I value deep connections with people beyond just sex. Like I genuinely want to get to know people in a way that I wasn't as concerned of in the past. Like in the past, I was much more concerned about the end result of just sex. Like how can I convince this girl to come back and sleep with me? Whereas now I genuinely can say that I'm much more interested in getting to know people, not just women, just people in general. I think podcasting has a lot to do with that on a more personal level. And sex is just a byproduct of getting to know each other, like the physical, emotional, spiritual kind of like part of that journey. But the things that I consider cool in my life right now as a 26-year-old, the 18-year-old probably would have slapped me and been like, yo, what the fuck you doing? Like, that's not cool. So I completely get that.
Yeah, I think part of that is maturing. We're about the same age. I'm 26 in a week, so we're pretty much the same age. And I think part of this is probably like just a general natural maturing. I do think like male sexual promiscuity is a bit of a developmental stage, especially when you're younger. And there is again some evolutionary like kind of like drivers for that, like because. Mm-hmm. I won't go into the details because it'll get a bit complicated, but like basically, if you like when you're younger, your body wants to value spreading on life, so it puts greater emphasis at a younger age on spreading life because things that die younger that already would have passed on their genes are like the sexual selection says that's a good thing, if you know what I mean. So like there's basically a weight when you're younger to spread your genes more than when you're older.
Yeah, like evolution only cares about you passing on your genetics. And if you drop dead after you do that, then
you've
who
succeeded.
cares?
Yeah.
Basically.
So, and obviously this, like, I don't want to get too, like, one of the things I'm conscious of when I'm writing my book is I don't want to get too bogged down in the scientific side of things because there's more to this than just, this is just evolution science. Like I'm not, I have faith, so it's like I'm not like completely like, and I think there's more to life than just the scientific explanations. There's so much more, like the spiritual connections, the emotional connection. So I'm quite conscious of that, but at the same time, it is also a very strong argument that people understand. So,
do you have time to get into your societal glue article? Because that's something that, me too. That's the most important thing. You got at least. You got to be having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your societal glue, sex and relationships, one of the main points is monogamous pair bonding is essential for society. And when I was first reading this article, I thought that it was going to go more into a moralistic explanation where like you should be monogamous because it's the right thing to do. But regardless of that, it sounds like you were arguing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that marriage and monogamous relationships actually allow more men to have sex, which means that less men will be deprived of sex and act out weird or violently in certain ways.
Yeah,
so like basically men on the bottom tier will also have access to sex because according to the Pareto principle, which you mentioned in the article, if every man was fucking wild and free and not in a monogamous relationship, 20% of men would be sleeping with 80% of women. And there wouldn't be a lot of leftover for people on the bottom part of the food chain. And I was actually thinking about this the other day, and you actually mentioned Antifa in your article. I had watched some videos and the thought ran through my mind. I'm like, damn, like these dudes just need to get laid. Like, like they wouldn't be doing this shit if they were having, regular, semi-regular sex, like having a healthy sex life. Like I feel like that just makes things so much better when you are comfortable going out and talking to women and have a decent sex life. Like it makes other things seem so much less of a problem than they or things that like are more magnified in your life. If you have a healthy sex life, you're just like, oh, it's not that important. Like, I don't need to go out in the street and like hit this dude with a hammer in an Antifa rally or whatever. Like, but I was having that thought. Would you be able to talk a little bit on the monogamous pair bonding and what that means for society?
Yeah, sure. So like, I'm glad you picked up that I'm trying not to moralize. Like I don't think moralizing to people is an effective argument. Like it just makes people pissed off. So like I'm in general, actually, I'm pretty accepting of people. Like, and in the past, I used to be like pretty left wing in my political views. And I do want to look after people who are maybe like at the lower end of society. I don't think we can just like run roughshod over them. The difference is like I think the way that we achieve that is different from, for example, what the traditional like woke crowd would believe. So I'm glad you picked up on that. About monogamy, basically, I think it's very, very, very important for stable societies because I'm very sex positive. Even though I'm against promiscuous sex, I agree with you. I think sex is very important. It's like fundamental for how we view ourselves, how we react to the world around us. And there's a big part of the feminism as well, not just Antifa. Like feminism comes from middle-aged women who don't have access to sex and becoming bitter about that. There's an element of that to it as well. It's not just men. This affects.
And I think it's just obvious that sex is better when you're having it with the same person repeatedly because you get to know each other's bodies. Like there's so many studies that I've read or polls where, women are asked, did you reach orgasm the first time with a sexual partner? And the answer is overwhelmingly no. And a lot of the reason that people have sex besides the procreation is you want to have a good time. You want to get pleasure out of it. And
I agree about sex with someone, as you say, for like women are more likely to orgasm if they're having sex with a partner regularly as you get to know your body. Again, I also think that speaks to the fact that biologically that's another point that proves that women shouldn't be promiscuous. That's a reinforcement of that point. But for the monogamy and social stability, basically the idea is like sex is very important to people and their self-identity. So if you have a successful sex life, if you have good sex, it makes you feel like you are like in some way successful. It's not the only factor, of course, but it is a big factor in how you view yourself. So men and women who don't have access to sex, aren't having regular sex, tend to have a lower opinion of themselves. And in general, they tend to act out in a way that will be negative for society. So I use the example in that argument of like polygamy. And in polygamous countries, there is say, for example, a Muslim country which follows Sharia law, one man can have up to 5 wives, but only, by the way, if you can respect it and you can afford them. It's not just like any man can do that. So it's the highest tier of men will have like a far greater monopoly on the access to sex, and the lowest tier men have just on basic demographics don't have access to sex because these are also sexual. They were like sexually exclusive. So as a result, men go 2 ways. They act out because they don't have access to sex, and B, which kind of causes maybe some mental problems or whatever, like they're not quite in line. You use the example of Antifa. Yeah, that's like, I would say that kind of behavior is exactly that. It's antisocial behavior that comes from not having access to sex and a bad view of yourself, bad self-image. Number 2, they will act out in ways that they want to gain status. Okay, so they want to be the men who are at the top. And one way that men do this is through conflict. Like conflict is like intrinsic to humanity. The history of man is a history of war. But the problem is, like I just did some research about this for the book, is that men who like countries that have polygamous relationships have a far higher, greater chance of civil war. So what that is that men within the country, the lowest tier of men, therefore go try and take status from the higher tier of men by acting out maybe in violent ways through stealing, through criminal activities. I use the example of Sudan. And in Sudan, they have polygamous relationships. And to have a wife, you have to pay the parents, like the daughter's parents, in cows, in cattle. That's how they measure wealth. So in Sudan, getting the amount of cows you need for a wife is very difficult. You have to work very hard. You have to be quite wealthy, or your family has to already be wealthy to get that. So the men basically go out and they steal cattle from the other tribe, and then they bring them back, and they therefore get a wife. But that creates this conflict that's constantly going on within the country between separate communities and separate tribes that destabilizes the country. And it's basically in a system where it's in constant warfare, it's not stable, so you can't build a coherent society. Whereas if you look at, for example, Christian societies, Christian cultures, places like Europe, England, America, you would have one man, one woman. And what this accounts for in a monogamous marriage is that most people have access to sex, and the society kind of becomes stratified. Like the highest quality man will get highest quality woman in general. Low quality man will get a low quality woman in general. But everyone gets someone. So instead of constantly warring for resources, warring over women, trying to get access to sex, instead we can have a more cooperative society. And then with cooperation comes, like great infrastructure projects, art, creations, a creation of society and a culture, which is not destructive, it's productive. That's kind of the basic of it. Hopefully that kind of made sense.
That does make sense. I was kind of thinking along the devil's advocate line. If you have a guy who's particularly sexually desirable, what would you say to him in order to get him to like see the side of, hey, like for the good of society, maybe you shouldn't be having sex with all of these women. Maybe you should settle down with one and like leave some for the rest of us.
So traditionally that was done through shame culture. So if you didn't do that, you would have been shamed. So it would have been, you'd have lost status as a result of that behavior. So that would have been traditionally how it was done. I'd say another way is to focus on legacy or like children. Like I think all of us have a desire to like leave a legacy. I think that's pretty intrinsic within humans, whether that is through what you create, your art, your work, what you do in the world, such as like leaders. But another way of forming legacy is your children. They are, I mean, in many ways, it's the best way of leaving your legacy because it is your genetics that are being passed on. And if you raise them well, which I would argue mandates a nuclear family, mandates a two-parent system. Again, there's evolutionary reasons for that, but also the truth of that is played out through statistics. You can see that single parent, single mother, single father children tend to perform worse and have more problems in their life, whether it be drug abuse or substance issues or mental health issues. So I would argue that if you want to have a sufficient legacy and to live on in your life and pass on like who you are as a person onto the next generation and continue that, you would have to raise a child with a good woman who, I believe that if you're looking for a long-term partner, a man should look for a woman who would make a good mother, and a woman should look for a man who would make a good father. So you look for that, and then you want to support your children and make them as successful as possible for yourself in a selfish way, for your legacy. And you can tie in issues of patriotism. Do you want to live in a society which is good or bad? And I would say that this is going to make a better society. So there's different ways that you could play on that. But traditionally, it would have been a shame culture, and your own respect would have been directly correlated to your family life.
It's funny how our preferences change. At least for me, you know, when you're just hooking up with a girl casually in college, all you're worried about when you're 20 years old is, you know, is she fun to hang out with?
Yeah.
And then when you're 23, 24, 25, when you start to get up there, you're spending time with a woman and you're thinking, you know, is she going to make a good mother? And I'm just like, so sometimes I'm like, I know relatively it seems far away from me, but I, and, you know, I think being a father is something that I think is uh, is what I want to do, and I don't think I'll fulfill my purpose or manhood on this planet if I leave it without, you know, being a father, whether it's having children of my out of my own gene pool or adopting children, whatever it may be. Like, I think being a father is part of the reason why we're put here as
Yeah,
men.
I
But it's
agree.
like, it's crazy how that's comes to like into your psyche after a certain age, where it's like you see this, you know, maybe it's like this really hot girl in front of you, and then you're just like, but would she make a good mother though? And like that thought has never entered into my mind until like probably the past 2 or 3 years, where I'm like, shit, like that's actually a good point. If I'm in a relationship with this woman at 26 years old, there's a pretty good chance that she might be the mother of my children. So that's something I seriously need to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I think like as men, we're a bit more lucky in this regard because our reproductive capability lasts with less harmful effects for your children. So we can be a bit more fussy with it, if you know what I mean. Maybe not fussy is the wrong word, but we can be a bit more patient. Whereas,
Yes, yeah,
yeah, whereas women
yeah.
don't have that luxury to the same degree. The older they get, the harder it is for them to conceive, and the actually really hard fact that people is a tough one for people to manage with. But the later you have children, the more likely that child will have like a Down syndrome or autism or something like that, and will have problems in the future as well. So there there are these consequences we kind of push away and ignore, which are, again, I would argue, are driven by our biology. But and in the past, our culture supported our biology, whereas now our culture and our biology do not align. They're not. They're not following the same course, and that's why we're getting so many problems as well.
I think that's something that I see playing out, especially in the United States, where it's not uncommon for a 40-year-old guy to marry a 28 or 30-year-old woman, because we're not necessarily burdened by the same biological clock.
Mm.
It's you can still be someone that's seen as a good mate or an attractive mate to a woman that's in her late 20s, early 30s, in the prime of her child birthing years, even if you're an older male, maybe in your late 30s, 40s, which I think kind of plays out. There was another thought I was having when I was reading your article, the one where we're going through on sex and relationships, going back to men getting weird and violent. And we're talking about Antifa. I had the thought about, you know, should we legalize prostitution? Like, would that give men on a lower tier access to kind of release these urges and not take them out violently in society? I, I didn't think that I would ever be in favor of legalizing prostitution. Especially, I read a book about modern sex slavery and like all the things that come with it. This guy Siddhartha Kartha writes about how legalizing prostitution in Western societies will actually make it either easier to smuggle in sex slaves, kids that are essentially stolen from other countries. And that's obviously something that's despicable and horrible. And if we're taking into account just the males that are acting out violently because they're not having sex, or in large part because sex is not available to them, I was wondering if you think legalizing prostitution would be something feasible that could kind of like quell that problem, since it seems like we're entering a period where there's not going to be as many monogamous relationships as there were in the past?
So two ways I think I can go with this. I think the first one is that the problem with that is you still don't get the emotional and spiritual component of sex, which is very important as well for your sexual satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of like relationships as well is not, I do think sex is a very core part of it, but it's also having partnership. And you still won't get that if you're just visiting prostitutes, basically. So I think that's an issue that needs to be considered there. The second thing I would say is that in general, for those kind of things, I'm slightly more in favor of legalization and monitoring rather than having it like the subject of a black market. So in general, I think that is because
Mm-hmm.
like even it's illegal, like it's not like prostitution doesn't exist in every country in the world. You know, it's still
Mm-hmm.
there even though it's illegal. And I think it's maybe better to have it legal and monitored, but still heavily stigmatized. And that's the problem. Like the problem with legalization is it gives the impression that therefore it's a good thing, which I don't think it is. But I think it's a problem that you can't necessarily just have like an ideological lens to, because it exists. I mean, I've been to Amsterdam a couple of times because it's not far from England, and they have legalized prostitution in Amsterdam, and it's kind of like more of a tourist attraction than anything. It's people go and just wander around, like loads of women just wander around, like interesting. But I don't know how many of the problems that actually solved. I'm not sure, but they do have like things like sexual health, like screenings and checkups to make sure they don't have like diseases and stuff. So that's obviously better for the woman and for the men that visit them. So you're not spreading those diseases. So there are positive effects,
Mm-hmm.
but in general, I'm pretty anti-hedonism, whether it's partying, drugs, drinking, sex, like promiscuous sex. I'm not sure cultures have always limited that. Like you're allowed to have hedonistic times, but it was never like every weekend. It would be like on special occasions,
Mm-hmm.
the solstices and stuff. So there is a tradition of it, but I think, yeah, it's a tough one. These kind of issues are a tough one to pass out, and I'm not 100% sure where I do actually stand on that. Like I see the positives of both sides, if you know what I mean. There's positives and negatives to both, but I don't think that will solve the problem of societal instability due to sex, because I think it misses too much.
Yeah. It's just it kind of just popped into my head when I was reading your article. Like, if there are all these guys that are sexually frustrated and think they can't access sex, especially like the incel culture
Yeah.
is something that kind of blows my mind too, where you have hundreds of thousands of males in the US that say that they are incapable of having sex with women, not because of any, physical detriment or, any sort of malfunction with their body, but just because like they're not able to attract women. Like they're like, which I don't know, labeling yourself as an incel, I think it's kind of doubling down on that, because if you're having trouble attracting women, labeling yourself as someone that's never going to have sex with women is not going to make it any easier for you. So if I understand the draw to join a cult of guys that also feel the way you feel, but then you're labeling yourself as someone who is never going to have sex with women, not going to have a shot. And so my initial thought was, okay, like what if these guys could just pay for sex? Like what if you could just get rid of that urge somehow and they wouldn't, be going to Antifa rallies or, causing violence or doing it. More of like a practical solution that I know would not fulfill their deeper desires, but like something that I guess would quell it in the short term.
Yeah, I think it can obviously serve a purpose in that regard. And I think, but like the way I put it, I think about it is like, it's not like prostitution doesn't exist. These guys could access that, and a lot of them don't want to because of their pride, or it's like, obviously it's a cheap solution, right? You're not getting a lot of sexual gratification as well as like linked to status as well. Like if you have like a beautiful woman that's your partner, that's like yeah, that makes you feel good on a status level as well. Whereas if you're just paying for sex, it's like, yeah, you get the physical redress, but you're not getting the self-worth that comes with it. In some cases it can make it worse, you know. Same like promiscuous behavior. Like often after you have like a one night stand or whatever, you feel kind of shitty, you know. I think it's kind of the same thing. So I think it's something that like it will always exist to some degree. So in that regard, I'm kind of more pro, like, at least have it safe, you know, like, so it's safe for people if they're going to access it.
I agree. I think safety is a big part of it. If you have time, one more thing I wanted to get into was your pullback from atheism.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because I think we kind of went in opposite directions, which is why I'm interested in it. So you had said it in some previous posts and blogs that you used to be a staunch atheist, and you kind of pulled back from that and grew to believe in something greater. I think I kind of took the opposite path, where I grew up raised Catholic, and I went to, you know, private Catholic high school and kind of got the whole spiel of, you know, like your belief in God trumps your ability to reason, and you know, we value your belief over it. There's a lot of things that kind of push me towards, I would say, de facto atheism, where I don't believe. I acknowledge that there's a possibility that God exists, but I live my life as though He doesn't. So for me, I was curious to what drew you away from atheism.
So I think I'll start from the beginning for me. So I was raised an atheist by my parents. My parents are very liberal, kind of left wing politically, and very, very good people. They raised me really well, but they are atheists, and with that came some negative effects. I think there's like a lack of meaning in life, and I think part of, like, I used to be like borderline alcoholic and partier, very like hardcore on that, and I think part of that came from the lack of meaning that I had in my life, is lack of God. And I also think that humans intrinsically have a need to believe in something spiritual. I think every culture has a religion, right? There's no culture in the whole of history that hasn't had some kind of religion. Apart from, modern life, this is the first time. If you go back to hunter-gatherers, they believed in animism and like the nature gods, and paganism, it's still a spiritual worship. And then you have, Protestantism, Catholicism in the Abrahamic, more modern times. Romans and Greeks believed in gods. So it's like every culture has some belief in God, which kind of, or a God or something bigger than us, which kind of makes me believe that it's intrinsic to humanity. It's not something that we can just do without. So that was part of it. And the second part for me is seeing how some things in my life like are unexplainable. Some things are just unexplainable that have happened to me. And it kind of drew me closer over time. And I went from atheist to kind of agnostic to I believe in God, to now I'm sort of more like in line with a proper like Protestant belief system, a Protestant Christian belief system. I'm not at the same time like a fully conventional religious person. Like I'm not someone who believes like I have to follow like what necessarily other people tell me is right, if you know what I mean. Like just because they interpret the Bible in this way, and maybe I read it and think, I'm not sure I agree with that interpretation, like then I'm not going to necessarily do that, if you know what I mean. Like I personally have the belief that like religion is like a vertical relationship. So it's a relationship between like me and God, rather than a horizontal relationship, which is a relationship between me and my other Christians, right? And I think in some way we have to, if you want to have a proper especially in the modern world, a proper religious belief, you have to kind of take some parts that fit with you. You have to like self-actualize it. You can't just blindly follow prescriptions. And some things like obviously are inarguable. You can't, like, for example, the ability to forgive in Christianity. You can't just be like, oh, I don't agree with that. Like there's some things that like you have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that we've got to be careful. Like some religion, just because someone tells you this is the way that religion's supposed to be, doesn't necessarily mean it is, if you know what I mean.
I totally get that. I guess where I would start with that is when I first was exploring atheist content, it was Richard Dawkins, which I'm sure a lot of people have
Yeah.
started with that. And so I kind of had this mentality, you know, after I read my first Richard Dawkins book, I think it was The God Delusion, I kind of had this mentality of like atheistic arrogance where I'm just like, you peasants, like you still believe in God, like good luck. Like
I'm not so keen on
yeah,
that.
no, and I was totally like that while I was kind of exploring
Me too.
atheism for the first few months to a year, whatever it was. I was probably like 22 or 23 when I stumbled upon.
That was me as a kid, so I'm an early teenager. So
I went through that phase of kind of like looking down on people that still believed in religion, and then I went through this. I kind of just like realized like I would never, even if I identified as an atheist, like I'm an atheist right now. I still grew up in this sort of Christian soup bath. Like I was raised as a Catholic and like had all this meaning instilled in me when I was a kid. So even if I'm an atheist now, like I still have the upbringing of a Catholic kid that grew up in New York. And I don't think I'll ever be able to separate from that. Like that's always going to be a part of me. I think I would be drastically different if I was always raised as an atheist, excuse me. Whereas if I
yeah,
didn't, spend my first 18 years believing in God and going to Catholic school, and I kind of went through this shift where I tried to get away from the arrogance of what I was experiencing, like learning about atheism to the point where I'm like, all right, if people believe in God, that's fine. Like, I don't want to push my beliefs upon other people. Like, I don't want my atheism to become a religion, if that makes sense. Like, I don't
yeah,
want to try to convert people to atheism. I want to believe what I want to believe. And I know that the structure of religion, regardless of what you believe or not, has meaning in people's lives. I take for granted when people go to church across the United States because I live in a metro center in New York City. But for a lot of people in the middle of the country, when they go and see their friends or when they socialize, that's at church. Like they go to church to be social human beings. And that's like when they see their friends. And that's like their whole structure. That's how people center their weeks. And there's like a lot of good things that come from the structure of religion. So I think somewhat got away from thinking that, I'm somewhat on this like pedestal of atheism where I'm like looking down on people that believe in religion. I don't think that way. And I try not to think that way anymore. I did have this kind of, I guess, realization where if there is nothing after this life, like this life is the only thing that is, and when we die, we're just we're creatures, like we experience the same death as other beings on this planet, where our consciousness just ceases to exist. That made me appreciate life even more, where like I felt the drive to be more present with people in my interactions. I wanted to be more present in conversations. I just like, I feel this overwhelming sense of like, this is my only go round. So I want to make it count. Like, I know I'm not going to get a second chance at redemption. And I think that coupled with the fact that when we had questions in Catholic school, and like I'm talking back in high school, there was always this sense that the greatest thing you could do was believe in God, where, even if I lived my life as a good person and I did good for other people and say like, I touched 1 million people's lives when I was alive and like it's in some small way. And then I got to the gates of heaven and God was like, well, did you believe in me though? And I gave him an honest answer and I said, no. And he'd be like, well, you can't get into heaven. Why is belief in something that has no evidence or why is belief held as the highest standard in God? Like, why would a perfect being care whether these tiny humans believe in him or not? Like, why would the most perfect being in the world give a shit about whether we believe in him? Why wouldn't his number one priority be like, well, are they acting in good ways? Why, or are they doing good things? Are they taking advantage of their time while they're still alive? Why is it always this thing like where you, in the face of evidence, did you still believe in God? Even if all evidence points to the contrary, it's like held up as this strength of like you still held faith in him, even though the evidence does not point to that direction. It's seen as like you becoming stronger in your faith. And the evidence is like a test. And I never really believed in that.
Yeah, I don't either, actually.
I'm an atheist right now. I don't know if I'll be an atheist for the rest of my life. Right now, I'm open to having my mind changed and going through uh, different experiences and learning different things. I'm sure I will feel differently at least, a year, 5 years, 10 years from now than I do now. I don't know, kind of just that whole experience of belief over everything else kind of turned me off.
I get that as well. That's one of the things that I'm not so keen on. I think, yeah, if you live in accordance with like a good life, that should be valued more. And I do believe that as well. I do think sometimes maybe that issue is, for me, it's somewhat coercive, which I'm not so keen on. But this is why, yeah, I'm not necessarily like you say, you can't detach yourself from your Catholic upbringing. I can't detach myself from my atheist upbringing. I still have some issues with some of the details like that. But at the same time, like I do think the net positive is good. Also, I think like religion in general is like a good, like to go back in the same way, I think monogamy is good for society. I do think religion is good for society. I think we need to have shared stories that like, and I don't mean that in like a story is made up, but like shared like narrative, a shared belief that connects people and brings people closer for societal cohesion as well. I think that's quite important. And in general, the teachings within all major religions are pretty good. Like, can't really argue with a lot of it. So, in terms of like how to behave, how to treat other people, and like the truths held within the stories, within parables and stuff, are all very, very very good. I think in general, positive things. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one to discuss because I'm still pretty early on in my spiritual journey. Like I only sort of have changed this probably over the course of 3 or 4 years, and I'm definitely not like fully formed in my beliefs on this issue. But for me, I've seen a lot of positive changes in my life since I have embraced faith. So
the parables and beliefs, I think a lot of the mainstream Christianity is true. I know just from going to Catholic school, a lot of the things that go in the Bible are super fucked up because I studied it, and it was like our job to go through this for 4 years. But I also acknowledge that most people that are Christians are not fundamental Christians. There's some people that take those stories literally. A lot of people are just kind of going by the mainstream view of Christianity and the parables that are kind of upheld in the New Testament. I think I'm in a similar part of the journey, except we're just on opposite ends of the spectrum where I'm kind of just exploring atheism. The thing that worries me is that without a God, what am I worshiping? And
Yeah, that's one of the key problems, I think.
Yeah, like I would like to think that I'm worshiping the fact that I'm doing good because I can, and I'm alive, and I think uh like one of the things that I try to live by is that I'm here, so I might as well do good. The thing that worries me is that like that's not what I'm worshiping. I'm worshiping something else without realizing it, and it's just
Yeah.
kind of like working its way into my life in undertones, which is even more scarier. Like I'd rather be conscious of something I'm worshiping than thinking I'm worshiping something else and not being aware of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me because I do think like I think we have, as I mentioned earlier, like an intrinsic need to have faith and to worship something bigger than ourselves. And when we don't have something that is obvious in that, we're going to have some kind of false god that we're worshiping, whether it's scientific rationalism or like if it's, yeah, like personal pleasure, if it's a hedonistic belief, or even like, yeah, the worship of like success or money or wealth or whatever. There's a lot of different ways that it can creep into your life that is a little bit hard to understand, you know, and like to, in some ways, you don't know what that is a vessel for, right? Like to use the Christian like metaphor, like of the devil comes in temptation, right? Like you don't know for sure. But I'm not saying that that is the case, by the way. It's just my experience of watching other people's behavior, like who don't have belief, they tend to actually demonstrate belief, but in a different system, like whether it be a political belief. Like, for example, yeah, most of the left wing neo Marxists and are atheists, you know, so they worship equality, like the altar of equality, and that's what they're going to get, and they're going to do everything to strive for this goal, and it's almost a religious goal that they have. And you get some people, yeah, who worship the altar of scientific rationalism, and I like while I'm a big proponent for science, I think it has its flaws in the methodology, like it that are intrinsic within it, which is why you have to take it with other areas and weave them all in, you know. So, and
Yeah.
it's a very tough thing, right? We don't have any answers to these things. That's why, in some ways, just exploring them and thinking about them is maybe like, and not just dogmatically believing something is maybe more important, you know, is being intellectually honest about it with yourself, and that self-reflection and getting to know yourself is maybe what the whole purpose is. Who knows? We don't really know, you know. Maybe that self-reflection is the goal. Who knows, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like if, say, tomorrow there was hard evidence that came out that there is no God, there was some scientific rationalization that came out that proved without a doubt that there is no God, would that be better for humanity? Like, is a belief in a higher power, regardless of evidence or not, good for humanity? And that's something that I've been wondering. Like, do people need something to believe in that's superhuman in a sense, that's beyond something that we can understand to keep order, even if evidence shows that that's contrary to our beliefs? Would we be better people believing in something like that? That's something that I've kind of been struggling with.
And I think, do we need to know? Like sometimes, like we have this. Sometimes, like the ego or humanity, we like need to know. We need to know that answer. What is the real truth? And then maybe it's better that we just don't know for some things. Like admitting we don't know the answer is probably more true than trying to say that we do. You know, like we don't know. Like, and even like when I'm talking about the societal things we were touching on before, like some of these things, I don't know if I'm right. I think I am, but I don't know if I'm right. You know what I mean? I could be wrong. I could be misinterpreting something, or I could just like be completely ignoring something, or my bias is clouding me. Like sometimes it's good just to say, yeah, we don't know.
I think that's something that is common ground between religion and atheism is that there's room in both to say we don't know. I think that when I was younger and I would ask those type of questions in Catholic school, and I would say, like, can you explain this or the reason for this? The answer would be, we don't know. God works in mysterious ways. And with atheism, it's like, we don't know now, but there may be a scientific explanation for this down the line. But like right now, we're not going to prescribe anything to that. We just don't know. We're just going to like leave it open ended.
One of the problems with science is it's constantly changing as well. So they prescribe something based on what is scientifically true now, and then we find out 2 years later that actually that was faulty evidence or whatever. That's one of my that's one of the issues I have with science as a methodology, is that like it says we do know, and it's kind of implicit within scientific thought that like, yeah, this is the answer. Look, we have evidence that proves this, but yeah, maybe there was a flaw in that methodological process. Maybe you didn't consider this. Maybe actually that's not actually the mechanism that's causing it. That we're measuring the effects, but we don't know the mechanism. It's that's why I think it's so important we take all these things and try and blend them into one. I think that's where people who have the best understanding of things tend to try and do. Like you referenced Richard Dawkins earlier, whereas I think his methodology is really flawed because he's just like, this is the truth, this is what I believe, and there's no room for anything else, And for me, that is, like just as bad as the fundamentalist Christian saying you have to believe this, otherwise you're going to hell. It's kind of, they're arguing from different places, but they're actually in the same part of the spectrum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like atheism can take on a religiosity of its own, where it's just on an opposite end of the spectrum. I think that's a good place to end off. Jack, thank you again for taking the time to hop on the podcast. I know we went way over the 60 to 90 minutes that I originally sent you. I had fun. I hope you had fun too. And I enjoy doing this because I know that we agree on a lot of things, but we also disagree on certain points, and we're able to talk about these things in a way that it doesn't seem like a lot of people are able to understand on Twitter. Twitter is not real life. And
yeah, for sure.
Which is ironically where I first discovered your content, and I'm grateful for that. I think you stand out on Twitter, and your following is going to grow exponentially more because I love the way that you tweet. I think it really gets to the point, and I like reading your writing. So thanks again for hopping on the podcast.
Well, thanks for saying that for first. I appreciate that. And yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I wouldn't have carried on if I wasn't enjoying myself. Wouldn't have gone, I think, over 2 hours now. So if I wasn't enjoying the conversation. And yeah, we tackled some tough topics, but maintained it in a respectful way. So that's even, we disagree, but maybe on some things, but we're having the conversation. That's the important thing. And that's why these kind of podcasts and also my blog writing is very important. As you say, Twitter is where most people know me from, but because it's basically the only platform I'm on. But Twitter is kind of like what's the way? It's like the missile that kind of breaks the barrier. It's like you've got to do like the slightly controversial thing, but it's kind of what is the breadcrumb that leads you to the nuance. So it's very effective for reaching people. And then maybe you say something that's a bit controversial, or it's a statement, but then if they follow the breadcrumbs, and maybe hopefully read my blog or listen to this, they'll realize there's a lot more nuance to my thinking than just like, do this, you're an idiot. If you do this, you're not an idiot. Obviously, I don't think like that.
Yeah, exactly. 280 characters doesn't allow for much nuance. So hopefully people actually do their due diligence and follow it to your blog content. I think a lot of people take things out of context and try to hang people or dunk people on Twitter because of one part of a tweet or something context, which is, stupid, but that's just the nature of the beast, I guess, on Twitter.
That's Twitter.
Yeah, that's Twitter.
It's the medium. It's the medium. So
yeah, but thank you again for hopping on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. And thank you very much for inviting me on. I'll just say as well before we go, if anyone wants to find me on Twitter, I am at Think.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I'm at Think in Peach. And I also have my blog, which is thinkinpeach.com. I also have just started up doing a newsletter. So if you want to sign up for like it's going to be a bit more like maybe controversial takes, not quite as long as my blog, but a bit more snappy, but more nuanced than by Twitter. Maybe sign up for that. And yeah, keep an eye out for this book that I'm writing, because it's in the process. I'm about 15-20% through, and it's going to be talking all about this, particularly the feminism and like the societal issues, loads of stuff that we've not even touched on in this 2 hours. So it's going to be fully referenced. And so keep an eye out for that. I'll be posting updates on my Twitter and my newsletter. So yeah, sign up for those.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Auxoro. If you haven't already, please hit us with a 5-star rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. This helps us appear higher in searches, which means more people will find out about Auxoro. Other ways to help get the word out is telling a friend, tagging us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, writing a blog post, or supporting us with a donation on Patreon. We are a completely independent platform, and we're grateful for every listener who supports this podcast. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and I'll see you guys next time.